The fiancé threw paint on her in front of everyone, but she had no idea her sister was a secret officer. She stood in front of every guest, paint running down her uniform, and for a moment she couldn't understand what had just happened to her. The woman about to marry into that family wanted her humiliated in front of everyone, and for a few terrible seconds it worked. Waiters froze. Guests looked away. Someone laughed, then quickly covered their mouth. But near the back of that crowded ballroom, a woman in a plain gray dress had been watching everything since the moment she walked in. Nobody knew her name. Nobody knew what she carried in her purse. And when she finally stepped forward, that engagement party would never be the same again. Hey friends, welcome back. If this is your first time here, grab a seat because this channel is all about real, raw, emotional stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Before we get into it, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or your flag in the comments. We love seeing our story family from all over the world. Tonight's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever told, so stay close, because you will not see this ending coming. Denise Carter had learned a long time ago that dignity wasn't something anyone could hand you. You had to hold on to it yourself every single day whether people noticed or not. She was 36 years old, and for the last 9 years, she had worked as the head housekeeper for the Whitfield family in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood just outside Atlanta called Brookhaven Estates. It was the kind of place with iron gates and long driveways, where the lawns were always cut in perfect diagonal lines and the mailboxes looked like tiny brick houses. Denise had grown up nowhere close to a street like this. She'd grown up in an apartment 2 bus rides away, raised by a mother who cleaned office buildings at night and a father who worked construction until his knees gave out. She knew what it meant to work with your hands and still be looked past. Every morning, Denise arrived at the Whitfield house at 7 sharp. She let herself in through the side door, hung her coat on the same hook she'd used for almost a decade, and started the coffee before anyone upstairs was even awake. She liked the quiet of those early hours. The big house felt different before the day started. Softer, calmer, like it hadn't decided yet what kind of day it was going to be. She dusted the same shelves, folded the same linens, and polished the same silver that had belonged to Mrs. Whitfield's grandmother. But it wasn't really about the objects. It was about care. Denise treated every room like it mattered because to her it did. She believed that the way you did small things said everything about who you were. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, the matriarch of the house, had come to trust Denise the way you trust family. Eleanor was in her early 60s, soft-spoken but sharp-eyed, and she often said that Denise had been the one steady thing in that house through every storm. Through her husband's long illness, through her son's rocky 20s, through more family arguments over dinner than she cared to count. "You've seen this family at its worst," Eleanor told her once, squeezing her hand. "And you never once made us feel small for it." Denise had never forgotten those words. They were the kind of thing you held on to on hard days. And Denise had plenty of hard days outside those gates. At home, in a modest rented duplex 15 minutes away, she was raising her 16-year-old daughter, Maya, mostly on her own. Maya's father had left when Maya was 4, and since then it had just been the 2 of them, learning how to build a life out of double shifts, coupon clippings, and late-night homework help at the kitchen table. Denise worked long hours at the Whitfield house and picked up weekend catering shifts whenever she could, all so that Maya could have what Denise never did, the chance to go to college without drowning in debt before she even started. Maya was bright. Painfully bright. The kind of bright that made teachers pull Denise aside at parent conferences to talk about scholarships and early admission programs. Denise kept every report card in a folder in her nightstand drawer, like proof that all those tired mornings had been worth something. She never talked about how exhausted she was. She just kept moving the way her own mother had. Marcus Whitfield, Eleanor's only son, was 32, easygoing, and had grown up watching Denise the way you grow up watching a beloved aunt, someone who scolded you gently when you tracked mud through the kitchen and covered for you when you snuck out past curfew. He respected her more than almost anyone in his life. When he was a teenager and going through his parents' rocky patch, It was Denise who sat with him on the back porch some nights, letting him talk without judging him for it. He never forgot that kind of quiet kindness. So when Marcus came home one spring evening and announced he was engaged, the whole house lit up. Eleanor cried happy tears into her napkin at dinner. Denise, setting down a fresh pitcher of sweet tea, felt genuinely glad for him. She had watched this young man grow into someone kind and thoughtful, and she hoped, the way you hope for someone you've watched grow up, that he'd found a partner who deserved him. His fiancée's name was Vanessa Sinclair. Vanessa was 30 years old, polished in the way that came from years of practice, always dressed like she was one photograph away from a magazine cover. She came from money on her mother's side and image consulting on her father's, and she had a way of walking into a room that made you feel like she was already deciding whether you belonged there. The first time Denise met her, Vanessa had barely looked at her, just handed over her coat without a word, eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Denise didn't take it personally at first. She had met plenty of people like that over the years, people raised to see staff as part of the furniture, and she'd learned not to let it sting. Her job wasn't to be seen. Her job was to make the house run so smoothly that nobody had to think about it at all. But as the weeks went on and Vanessa started coming around more often to plan the engagement party, something about her attention toward Denise began to shift, and not in a good way. Small comments sharper each time. A folded napkin that wasn't folded correctly. A vase moved 2 inches to the left, then criticized for being in the wrong spot at all. Vanessa had a way of speaking to Denise that she never used with anyone else in the house. Clipped, cold, faintly amused, like she was testing how much Denise would simply absorb without pushing back. Eleanor noticed it too once or twice, and pulled Denise aside afterward. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly one afternoon, after Vanessa had snapped at Denise over nothing at all. "That's not how we treat people in this house." "It's all right, Mrs. Whitfield," Denise said, and meant it mostly. She had survived worse than a little coldness from a bride-to-be. Still, there was something about the way Vanessa's eyes moved over her, assessing, dismissive, that left a small, uneasy feeling behind each time, like a splinter she couldn't quite locate to pull out. The engagement party was set for the second Saturday of the month, a big affair in the Whitfields' back garden, with a white tent, string lights, and a guest list that read like the who's who of Brookhaven Estates. Vanessa had insisted on hiring a professional event designer for the decor, including a large abstract art installation for photos, canvases and paint stations set up along the garden path, meant to look effortlessly artistic for the engagement photos that would surely end up online by morning. Denise had been asked to help oversee the setup that week, on top of her usual duties, and she didn't mind the extra work. She liked being useful. She liked knowing that when the day came, everything would run the way it was supposed to. What she didn't know yet, what nobody in that house knew yet, was that the party would end with paint on her uniform, a stranger's hand on her shoulder, and her whole world tilting sideways in front of everyone she'd worked so hard to serve well. She also didn't know that, 3 towns over, her younger sister Sophia had just been assigned to a new case, one that would, in a matter of days, bring her walking right through the Whitfields' front gate. Have you ever worked hard for people who never once stopped to really see you? Tell us about it in the comments below. The closer the party got, the more Denise noticed the cracks starting to show. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. Vanessa had a habit of rewriting plans at the last minute, and then acting shocked when the household staff hadn't read her mind. One afternoon she demanded the entire seating chart be redone because a second cousin she barely liked had been placed too close to the good photos. Another day, she insisted the caterer switch the appetizer menu entirely, only to switch it back 2 days later without apology, as if the confusion had never happened. Denise absorbed each change quietly, the way she absorbed most things, jotting notes in the little spiral pad she kept in her apron pocket. What Denise was slower to understand was where all of Vanessa's sharp edges were really coming from. Vanessa had grown up being told, in 100 small ways, that her value came from how polished she appeared. Her mother ran a boutique interior design firm that catered to Atlanta's wealthiest families, and Vanessa had spent her childhood watching her mother charm and manage clients who could make or break the business with one bad review. Appearances were currency in that world. Being in control of a room was survival. And somewhere along the way, Vanessa had absorbed the idea that warmth toward the help was a kind of weakness, a crack in the polished surface she'd spent her whole life building. What made it worse, though Vanessa would never have admitted this out loud, even to herself, was how much she resented the way this family already loved Denise. Eleanor asked about Maya's report cards. Marcus still called Denise Miss D, the way he had since he was 12, and sometimes lingered in the kitchen just to talk to her the way he used to as a kid. There was an ease between Denise and the Whitfields that Vanessa, for all her polish and planning, hadn't managed to build in over a year of dating Marcus. She told herself it didn't bother her. But it did, more than she wanted to admit, and small resentments have a way of finding somewhere to go. Denise, for her part, tried to give Vanessa the benefit of the doubt. Weddings were stressful. Brides got difficult. She'd seen it plenty of times catering other people's parties over the years. She told herself this was probably just nerves, that Vanessa would soften once the big day passed and she felt more secure in her place in this family. At home, Denise had her own storm brewing, a smaller and gentler one. Maya had been selected as a finalist for a statewide academic scholarship, one that could cover nearly her entire first 2 years of college. The finalist interview was scheduled for the same week as the engagement party, and Denise had been quietly rearranging her shifts for weeks trying to make sure she could be there for both, the job that paid the bills, and the daughter who was her entire reason for working so hard in the first place. "You don't have to come to the interview, Mom," Maya told her one night at the kitchen table, trying to sound braver than she looked. "I know work is busy." "I'll be there," Denise said, and there was no room for argument in her voice. "I have never missed one of your big days, and I am not about to start now." Maya smiled, the kind of small, grateful smile that made every tired bone in Denise's body feel worth it. Meanwhile, a few miles away, something else was quietly unfolding, something Denise had no idea was connected to her life at all. For the past several weeks, a plainly dressed woman had started appearing around Brookhaven Estates, at the coffee shop near the entrance gates, at the small gym 2 streets over, once even at the same nail salon Vanessa's mother frequented. She never stayed long. She never drew attention to herself. She dressed like anyone else in the neighborhood, blending into the background so completely that most people didn't remember her face 5 minutes after passing her. Her name was Sophia Carter, and she was 25 years old, 11 years younger than her sister Denise, and the baby of the family in every sense except the one that mattered most right now. Sophia had joined the police department right out of college and had recently been pulled onto a sensitive financial crimes unit investigating a wave of fraud complaints linked to high-end event planning companies across the Atlanta suburbs, companies suspected of laundering money through inflated wedding and party contracts. Brookhaven Estates, with its cluster of wealthy families and lavish celebrations, had become a focal point of the investigation. Sophia hadn't told her sister a single detail about the case. She wasn't allowed to, and even if she had been, she wouldn't have wanted to worry Denise with it. The sisters were close, closer than most considering the age gap, but Sophia had learned early in her career to keep her work life sealed off from her family entirely. It was safer that way. Cleaner. She had no idea, walking those quiet Brookhaven streets undercover, that her assignment was about to collide head-on with the person she loved most in the world. She definitely had no idea that the upcoming Whitfield engagement party, the very event catered by the company under investigation, was about to become the place where everything came together. Back at the Whitfield house, the days ticked closer to Saturday. The white tent went up in the backyard. String lights were threaded through the oak trees. The art installation Vanessa had insisted on, a row of blank canvases and open paint cans arranged along the garden path for guests to leave handprints as a keepsake, was delivered and set into place. Denise walked past it Thursday afternoon, arms full of folded linens, and paused for just a moment to admire it. It really was beautiful in its own chaotic way. She had no idea that by Saturday night, one of those paint cans would be the reason her whole life changed in front of 100 strangers. There was one moment that Thursday, though, that stuck with her longer than it should have. Vanessa had come storming into the kitchen over a delivery mix-up with the flowers, and when Denise calmly explained that the florist had already been called and a replacement order was on its way, Vanessa's face had gone tight and cold. "I wasn't asking for your commentary," she'd said, sharp enough that even Marcus, walking in behind her, stopped in the doorway. "Just fix it." Denise had simply nodded, the way she always did, and gone back to work. But Marcus lingered a moment after Vanessa left the room, an apology sitting unspoken on his face. He didn't say anything either, and later, alone with the dishes, Denise found herself wondering, not for the first time, what kind of life Marcus was walking into. Eleanor noticed too, of course. She noticed most things in her own house, even the things people tried hard to hide. That evening, over tea, she confided quietly to her husband's old friend, Judge Harmon, who'd stopped by to drop off an engagement gift early. "I love my son," Eleanor said, stirring sugar into her cup slower than necessary, "but I do wonder sometimes if he sees what the rest of us see." The judge, a kind and observant man, only nodded and said that sometimes people had to see things for themselves, in their own time, no matter how plainly everyone else could already see them. Across town, Sophia's investigation was picking up speed. Her unit had spent 3 months tracing a pattern of inflated invoices and shell accounts connected to a boutique event company called Ambrose and Vine, the very company hired to coordinate the Whitfield engagement party, run in part by a business partner of Vanessa's mother. It wasn't glamorous work. It was spreadsheets, bank records, quiet surveillance, and long nights parked outside venues watching who came and went. Sophia had grown used to being invisible in rooms full of people who would never imagine a woman in a plain gray cardigan could be carrying a badge in her purse. She liked it that way. It was easier to notice everything when nobody bothered to notice you back. Has something you were dreading ever turned out to be nothing compared to what actually happened? Let us know down in the comments. By 6 o'clock Saturday evening, the Whitfield backyard looked like something out of a magazine. String lights glowed gold against a darkening sky. A jazz trio played softly near the tent. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and near the garden path, the art installation stood exactly as planned. A row of blank white canvases, small tables of paint in every color, waiting for guests to leave their handprints as a keepsake of the night. Nearly 100 guests had arrived. Whitfield family friends, Vanessa's relatives, business associates, and a scattering of unfamiliar faces mixed quietly into the crowd, the way there always are at parties this large. Denise had been on her feet since noon. She'd helped set the final tables, checked in with the caterers, made sure the champagne was chilled exactly the way Eleanor liked it. She wore the same simple black uniform she always wore for events like this. Her hair pulled back neatly, a small gold cross at her neck that had belonged to her mother. She moved through the chaos with the same quiet steadiness she brought to everything, checking one more time that the paint station was tidy before the guests started drifting that way for photos. She had no idea that 30 feet away, standing near the edge of the tent in a plain gray dress, a woman was watching the entire party unfold with the sharp, careful attention of someone who had been trained to notice everything. Sophia had arrived an hour earlier, blending easily into the crowd the way she always did, there to quietly observe interactions between Ambrose and Vine staff and the Whitfield family's inner circle as part of her ongoing case. She had no idea, not yet, that the woman moving gracefully between the dessert table and the string lights, checking on every small detail with such quiet care, was her own sister. Denise had cut her hair differently since they'd last seen each other in person. From a distance, across a crowded tent, she simply hadn't recognized her. The trouble started small, the way trouble usually does. A guest, laughing too loudly near the paint station, knocked into one of the small tables. A can of deep red paint tipped, and a thin stream ran across the white tablecloth, dangerously close to the hem of Vanessa's ivory engagement dress. Denise was there within seconds, grabbing napkins, steadying the table, apologizing on behalf of a guest who wasn't even hers to apologize for. It was instinct. It was the job. It was who she was. But Vanessa, turning and seeing the red paint pooling near her dress, didn't see any of that. She saw, in one blinding, humiliated second, every camera in that backyard potentially catching her ruined dress on the biggest night of her engagement. Something inside her that had been tightening for weeks, the pressure, the wedding planning, the resentment she'd never let herself name, finally snapped. "Are you serious right now?" Vanessa's voice cracked across the yard, sharp enough that the jazz trio actually faltered mid-note. "This dress cost more than you make in 2 months, and you can't even keep a paint table steady?" Denise froze, napkins still in her hands. "Ms. Sinclair, I'm so sorry," a guest bumped. "I don't want to hear it." Vanessa's face had gone pale and furious, tears of pure humiliation gathering at the corners of her eyes. Heads were turning now, all across the yard, conversations dying mid-sentence. "You people never take anything seriously. You've been sloppy all week, and now you've ruined my dress in front of everyone I know." "Vanessa," Marcus started, moving toward her from across the lawn, alarm written all over his face. It was too late. Vanessa's hand had already closed around a nearby can of pale blue paint from the table, and before anyone could stop her, before Denise even fully understood what was happening, she flung it forward. The paint hit Denise square across the chest and shoulder, splattering down the front of her black uniform, some of it catching her cheek and jaw. For one full second, the entire backyard went silent. Denise stood there, paint dripping slowly down her uniform, her hands trembling slightly at her sides, too stunned to speak. 100 faces stared at her. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable, unwilling to get involved. Someone near the back let out a short, nervous laugh before quickly clamping a hand over their mouth. Eleanor's teacup had frozen halfway to her lips. Marcus stood rooted in place, his mouth open, no words coming out. "Get her out of my sight," Vanessa said, her voice shaking but her chin lifted, playing now to the crowd she'd just horrified. "She's fired. I want her gone." And that was the moment the woman in the plain gray dress finally moved. Sophia had watched the whole thing unfold from the edge of the tent, every protective instinct in her body screaming before her mind had even fully caught up to what she was seeing. She crossed the lawn in a handful of long, even strides, calm in a way that felt almost eerie against the chaos around her, and stepped directly between Vanessa and the trembling, paint-covered woman behind her. "That's enough," Sophia said, her voice carrying easily across the stunned silence. Vanessa blinked at her, confused, indignant. "Excuse me. Who exactly do you think you are?" Sophia reached into the small bag at her hip and pulled out a badge, holding it up clearly enough for the nearest guests to see. "Detective Sophia Carter, Fulton County Police. I just watched you assault this woman in front of 100 witnesses. You're going to need to come with me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a champagne glass. It shattered against the stone patio, and nobody moved to clean it up. Vanessa's face drained of every last bit of color. "This is insane, you can't just... I don't even know who you are. Ma'am, put your hands behind your back, please." Sophia's voice stayed level, professional, unshaken by the growing murmurs around them. Marcus stood frozen, staring back and forth between his fiancée and this stranger with a badge as if the ground beneath the whole party had quietly given way. And then Denise, wiping paint from her eyes with a shaking hand, finally looked up and really saw the woman standing in front of her. The world seemed to tilt sideways. "Sophia!" Denise's voice came out cracked, barely above a whisper. Sophia turned, and for one long suspended moment, the badge in her hand, the handcuffs half raised, the entire party holding its breath around them, all of it fell away. She was looking at her sister, paint-soaked, trembling, humiliated in front of 100 strangers, and somehow still, impossibly, the person Sophia had been protecting her whole life without even meaning to tonight. Denise, Sophia breathed, and for the first time all evening, her composure nearly cracked completely. Around them, the party had gone eerily quiet, as if 100 people had collectively forgotten how to breathe. Eleanor had risen from her chair without realizing it, one hand pressed flat against her chest. A few of the older guests exchanged confused, hushed whispers, trying to piece together how a stranger in a plain gray dress had suddenly taken control of the entire evening. Vanessa stood frozen between them, her ruined composure now the least of her problems, staring back and forth between the badge, the handcuffs, and the paint-streaked woman she had just humiliated in front of everyone she knew. Marcus finally found his legs and crossed the lawn, though he seemed unsure, for the first time in his life, whose side he was even walking toward. "Someone please tell me what is happening," he said quietly, to no one in particular, his voice thin with disbelief. Nobody answered him right away. For a long, strange moment, the only sound in that beautiful backyard was the soft, steady drip of pale blue paint falling from Denise's sleeve onto the stone patio below. What would you do if you were in Denise's place? Tell us honestly in the comments. Nobody moved for what felt like a full minute. Then Sophia, remembering herself, gently guided Vanessa toward the edge of the patio, away from the center of the crowd, and radioed for backup in a low, steady voice. 2 uniformed officers arrived within minutes, parking discreetly at the edge of the driveway so as not to draw more attention than the evening already had. Vanessa was led away in handcuffs past rows of stunned guests, past the string lights and the half-finished paint canvases, past the mother-in-law who had, only an hour earlier, been toasting to her future. Denise stood frozen through most of it, paint drying stiff against her uniform, until Eleanor rushed to her side with a stack of clean towels and an arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "Come inside, sweetheart," Eleanor murmured, guiding her gently away from the staring crowd. "Let's get you cleaned up." It wasn't until they reached the quiet of the kitchen, away from the noise and the whispering guests, that Denise finally let herself shake. "That was my sister," she said, half to Eleanor, half to herself, still trying to make sense of it. "That was Sophia. There. With a badge." Eleanor's eyebrows lifted in surprise, and then, slowly understanding. "The detective," she said softly. "Of course. Harder. I should have put it together." A few minutes later, Sophia slipped into the kitchen too, her official demeanor finally cracking at the edges now that Vanessa was safely in custody outside. She crossed the room and pulled her older sister into a hug so tight it nearly knocked the breath out of both of them, paint and all. "I didn't even recognize you at first," Sophia admitted into her sister's shoulder, voice thick. "I've been walking around this neighborhood for weeks and I never once thought." She pulled back, shaking her head, eyes wet. "I am so sorry. I should have called more. I should have visited." "You're here now," Denise said, gripping her sister's arms like she needed to confirm she was real. "That's what matters." Slowly, over cups of tea neither of them really drank, Sophia explained what she could. She'd been assigned to a financial crimes case months ago, tracking a pattern of fraud tied to Ambrose and Vine, the event company that had planned tonight's party. Inflated invoices, shell accounts, money quietly funneled through lavish weddings and galas across Brookhaven estates. She hadn't been at the party to watch over Denise. She hadn't even known Denise would be there working, not specifically, not on this exact case. She'd simply been doing her job, watching the room the way she always did, when everything happening near the paint station pulled her attention like a current she couldn't ignore. "I wasn't going to let anyone hurt you," Sophia said quietly. "Case or no case. I don't think I could have just stood there." It was Eleanor, gently clearing her throat from the doorway, who added the piece neither sister had expected. "There's something you both should probably know," she said carefully. "Vanessa's mother, Diane. She's been a business partner at Ambrose and Vine for almost 2 years now. Quietly. Off the books mostly. I only know because she mentioned it once, bragging, "At a dinner I'd rather forget." Sophia went very still. It was a piece of the puzzle her unit had been missing for weeks. A direct family link between the Sinclairs and the company under investigation, one that suddenly made tonight's events far more complicated, and far more important, than a single ugly outburst at an engagement party. Outside, word of what had happened moved through the remaining guests like wildfire. Hushed voices trading versions of the story that grew stranger with each retelling. Marcus found himself standing alone near the emptied paint station, staring down at the blue stain still drying on the stone, replaying the whole scene over and over in his mind. He thought about every sharp comment he'd let slide over the past few months. Every time Denise had absorbed Vanessa's coldness without complaint, and every time he had told himself it wasn't his place to say anything. It had always been his place. He understood that now, standing in the wreckage of what should have been the happiest night of his engagement. He found Denise still in the kitchen 20 minutes later, changed into a spare shirt Eleanor had dug out of a closet, her hands finally steady around a mug of tea. He stood in the doorway a long moment before he spoke. "I am so sorry," he said, and his voice broke slightly on the words. "I should have said something weeks ago. I saw it happening, Miss D, and I let it happen anyway. That's on me." Denise studied him for a moment. This young man she'd watched grow from a mud-tracking kid into someone capable of real remorse, and she softened just slightly. "You're seeing it now," she said quietly. "That counts for something." But even as she said it, she could see the harder question sitting behind his eyes, the one about what came next, about a wedding that suddenly felt impossible to imagine, about a fiancé now sitting in the back of a police car outside his own family's home. Nobody in that kitchen had an answer for him yet. Later that night, after most of the guests had finally trickled out into the dark, whispering to each other in the driveway about what they'd witnessed, Denise called Maya to let her know she'd be home late, and gently to warn her that she might look a little rattled when she walked through the door. Maya, sharp as ever, heard something underneath her mother's careful calm and pressed until Denise told her everything. There was a long pause on the line. "Mom," Maya finally said, her voice fierce in a way that made Denise's chest ache with pride. "You didn't deserve any of that. Not 1 second of it." "I know, baby," Denise said, and found, a little to her own surprise, that she actually believed it. Back at the house, Sophia stayed until nearly midnight, filling out preliminary paperwork on her tablet at the Whitfields' kitchen table while her sister sat beside her, still processing the strange, dizzying turn the evening had taken. It was surreal, Sophia admitted quietly, to have spent 3 months building a careful patient case against Ambrose and Vine, only to have one impulsive, ugly moment at a party crack it wide open faster than months of surveillance ever could. "Diane Sinclair is going to be a very important name in this case now," Sophia said, half to herself, scrolling through notes. "And so, unfortunately, is her daughter." Eleanor, hovering nearby with a fresh pot of coffee nobody had the energy to drink, shook her head slowly. "I always sensed there was something brittle about that girl," she said. "I just never imagined it went this deep." Marcus, sitting across the table with his head in his hands, hadn't said much in the last hour. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and a little lost. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel right now. Relieved, furious, heartbroken, maybe all three." "You're allowed to feel all three," Denise told him gently, and meant it. She had spent years watching this family weather storms, and she knew, better than most, that grief and relief could sit in the same chest at the same time without canceling each other out. Nobody in that kitchen had an answer for him yet, and nobody pretended to. Some nights simply had to be survived first, before anyone could begin to make sense of them in the morning. If you were Marcus in that moment, would you have known what to do? Let us know in the comments below. 3 weeks later, the Whitfield backyard looked completely different. The white tent was long gone. The paint station had been cleared away that same terrible night, though Denise had noticed, with a small private smile, that Eleanor had kept one of the canvases, a smeared, accidental swirl of red and blue where the chaos had first begun, framed and hung quietly in the mudroom, as if to remember that something painful could still turn into something worth keeping. The engagement was over. Marcus had ended it formally 2 days after the party, driving out to see Vanessa's family himself rather than hiding behind a phone call, even though every part of him had wanted to. It wasn't an easy conversation, and it wasn't a clean one either. Vanessa, out on bail and facing charges for assault, had cried and argued and, in one raw, honest moment near the end, finally admitted that she'd been cruel to Denise for reasons that had nothing to do with Denise at all. Jealousy, insecurity, a lifetime of believing that warmth was something you had to fight other people for. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it helped Marcus understand it, and understanding, he found, made it easier to walk away without hatred, just clarity. The investigation into Ambrose and Vine moved quickly after that. With the financial link between Diane Sinclair and the Shell accounts finally confirmed, Sophia's unit was able to secure warrants that broke the case open within days. It turned out to be one of the larger fraud cases her department had closed in years, and Sophia, though she'd never admit it out loud at work, knew privately that none of it would have unraveled so fast if her sister hadn't, however painfully, been standing in exactly the wrong place at exactly the right time. Denise kept her job, of course. Eleanor wouldn't have heard of anything else. But something had shifted in the house since that night. Something quieter and more permanent than an apology. Eleanor began introducing her differently at gatherings now, not as our housekeeper, but simply as Denise, who's been like family to us for years. It was a small change in wording. It meant more than Eleanor probably realized. There was a bigger change coming too, one Denise hadn't seen coming at all. A few weeks after the party, Eleanor sat her down at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee and an idea she'd apparently been turning over for a while. She'd watched Denise organize every event in that house for 9 years. The flowers, the timing, the small details nobody else thought to notice, and she wanted to help her turn that eye for detail into something of her own. Eleanor knew people. Wealthy people, event-hosting people. People who were always looking for someone reliable to trust with the details of their biggest days. With a little seed money and Eleanor's enthusiastic word of mouth, Denise could start her own event coordination business within the year, working for herself for the first time in her life instead of simply managing someone else's home. Denise sat with that offer for a long moment, turning her coffee mug slowly in her hands, feeling something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not quite disbelief. Something closer to permission. Permission to imagine a version of her life where her skill and her care were the whole point, not just a quiet background service nobody thought to mention. "I'd have to think about it," she said, though they both already knew what her answer would eventually be. That same week, Maya got the call about her scholarship. "Full ride, first 2 years covered entirely," the woman on the phone said. "Congratulations." Denise had to sit down on the kitchen floor when she heard. Phone pressed hard against her ear, tears finally falling after weeks of holding everything together for everyone else. All those tired mornings, all those double shifts, all those nights falling asleep with a folder of report cards still open on the nightstand. None of it had been wasted. It had all been leading here. Sophia came by that Sunday for dinner, out of uniform, laughing easily at the table for the first time in weeks. The tight, watchful posture of undercover work finally loosened out of her shoulders. She and Denise sat on the back porch afterward, the same porch where Denise had once talked to teenage Marcus through his own hard nights, and talked quietly under the stars about everything and nothing. Old memories, their mother, the strange, impossible coincidence that had brought them face to face in a stranger's backyard. "I keep thinking about that moment," Sophia admitted. "If I hadn't looked over right then. If I'd been a few seconds slower." "But you weren't," Denise said simply. "You never have been. Not once, not for me." Sophia smiled, a little watery, and let the silence sit between them, comfortable and full. Looking back on it all, Denise understood something she hadn't fully understood before that night. That the people who try hardest to make you feel small are usually the ones most afraid of how much room you actually take up in the world. Vanessa had thrown paint across a crowded party trying to shrink Denise down to nothing in front of everyone she worked for. Instead, she'd accidentally revealed exactly how much Denise was made of, and exactly how many people, when it mattered most, were willing to stand up for her. Dignity, Denise had always believed, wasn't something anyone could hand you or take away. You carried it yourself, quietly, every single day, whether anyone was watching or not. It just turned out that sometimes someone was watching after all, and sometimes that someone loved you enough to step forward the second it mattered most. By early autumn, Denise's detail, the small event coordination business Eleanor had helped her start, named half as a joke and half in earnest, had already booked its first 6 clients, mostly through word of mouth among Eleanor's friends. Denise still stopped by the Whitfield house most weeks, not as staff anymore but as a guest, sitting at the same kitchen table where she used to fold napkins, now sketching floor plans and flower arrangements for other people's biggest days. Marcus, still finding his footing after everything, had taken to calling her his first official client reference, and told anyone who asked that no one in Atlanta paid closer attention to the details that actually mattered. As for Vanessa, her case moved slowly through the courts over the following months, tangled up with her mother's far larger fraud charges. Denise felt, surprising even herself, less anger than she expected when she thought about it. Mostly just a quiet sadness for a woman who'd spent so long protecting an image that she'd never learned how to protect the people around her instead. She hoped, in the private way you hope for someone who hurt you, that Vanessa eventually found her way to something steadier than that. Sophia's unit closed the Ambrose and Vine case that winter, and though the file would always carry a strange personal footnote that never made it into any official report, she liked to tell Denise, only half joking, that she'd never worked a case quite like the one solved by an accidental spill of pale blue paint. To everyone watching tonight, thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. If it moved you even a little, take a moment this week to notice the people who quietly hold your world together, the ones who rarely get thanked, who show up early and stay late and never ask for recognition. A little kindness toward them costs you nothing, and it might mean everything. If this story hit you right in the chest the way it hit us while we were putting it together, do us a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps stories like Denise's reach the people who need to hear them. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe because we bring you real, emotional, true-to-life stories like this one every single week. We'd love to know, who's the Denise in your life, the person who shows up quietly and never gets enough credit for it? Tell us about them in the comments. We read every single one. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that character always shows, eventually, no matter who's watching, go ahead and share this video with them. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We'll see you in the next story.